I came first in 2016 and joined an organization called T-Hub based in Hyderabad in Telangana, as you said. In India, people shy away from being too direct when their response may be hesitation or disinterest, right? So that's definitely something very different, and that can hinder progress because I may spend a lot of time with a client that's not ultimately interested. Right? So India is not a place that you should do alone. Like that would require a lot of confidence, or you would need to move here. I think maybe then you can overcome some of those things. But otherwise, there have been large companies like Walmart and others who've significantly failed entering on their own, right? Or who had to try multiple times to find the right strategy to enter. If I ever learn an Indian language, is probably Hindi. Because it feels very familiar. As in comparison to Germany, there is some, I don't know, similarities that I pick up on. You may notice that my English is very Indian.
Very Indian.
That
I think
people
that's a
point
very
out
strong
quite
advantage.
a bit, and that is definitely an icebreaker for me.
Definitely. And what about Indian food? What's your best tried Indian food? What kind of food you love? The South Indian or the North Indian? Now that you know it's so different and so varied.
I can't say that I like one over the other, but there's one that I tend to miss when I'm in Germany, which is rasam. Like Holi, obviously, is a lot of fun.
The Sound of Money with Santosh Sirur.
Hello and welcome to another amazing episode of my podcast, The Sound of Money. And today we have a very special guest. She's originally from Germany, but today she joins me from New Delhi. And amazing chat. Looking forward to that. First, let me take this opportunity to introduce her. She is Juliane Frommter, who joins me from Delhi. She's the founder and the CEO of Myfirstindianclient. Well, that's an amazing and a very unique name to begin with. And I'm sure Juliane will have a lot more to add as we go through this podcast. Apart from the fact that she is a founder and CEO, she's also the innovation advisor to the European Union delegation in India. So we'll get to know a little more about that as well. And also, of course, she has had an amazing, wonderful experience working in India, working with Indians. And that's exactly why she is here for almost 4+ years with the Telangana government. So hi, Juliane, and welcome to my podcast, The Sound of Money.
Yeah, hello, Santosh. Thanks for having me.
Most welcome. Juliane, the first question, of course, is your company has a very unique name. My first Indian client, right? That's very unique. Maybe you could share a little more about why this word, my first Indian client, and then maybe talk a lot more about your goals, the promise that you have, for India from, representing your company.
Yeah, of course, Santosh. Actually, it took me quite a while to come up with the name that for the company that actually describes properly what we are intending to do under this brand. The idea here is basically to speak to non-Indian businesses, mostly in the innovation landscape, so in particular sectors and with their innovation, and help them find their first client in India. And obviously, that's a very crucial step. In any startup's journey, the first client is a very important factor of their success. And so it is the same if you want to enter into a new market as well. And that's where that name came from. Because we figured out, like, unless you find that first client that goes through the hurdles with you and gives you feedback on how to be successful in that new market, you're probably not making it. So my company basically aims to help founders and their teams through the journey as they look at India as a potential market for expansion.
Okay. Juliane, it comes at the right time, right? Where India is now in its, as we call the Amrit Kaal, there's so much of amazing future for the country. Is there a very specific reason why you thought it should be coming to India? Or is it something that, what really brings you to India? And what does make you think about India?
Right. I think for me, it's been a very organic journey. It's not that I've had a lot of macroeconomic thought when I first started engaging with India. In fact, it was more that the environment was even supportive of that. In the beginning, for me, it was a very explorative journey for
Mm-hmm.
me to jump into the Indian ecosystem in 2016.
Uh-huh.
And it's been a wonderful journey. So now my mission is to bring this to people who may go through similar struggles that I have gone through.
Yeah.
It is obviously like a huge cultural difference that you need to overcome. There is differences in how we do business, etc. And over the years, I've just built a good sense of what needs to be conveyed for two parties to come together and eventually do successfully business together. There's a lot of translating, and I don't mean English or like Indian languages per se, but we use the language very differently. We may mean different things when we say things. So part of what I do is also increase like the sensitivity for those
Mm.
uh, differences,
Yeah.
while always being focused on how can we make business possible, right? Like how can we bring those people closer together to engage with each other and ultimately exchange goods, services, and money.
Okay, interesting. Julian, you mentioned to me prior to the show that you had an amazing experience staying in India, working with Indians, and I believe that's Telangana, which is a more of a southern part of India. How was that experience coming first time to India, settling down, understanding the people and culture? Maybe a few pointers on that.
Yeah, so I came first in 2016 and joined an organization called T-Hub based in Hyderabad in Telangana, as you said. I'm sure many of the audience may have heard of this organization. They're basically one of the larger organizations within India who support startups from incubation, acceleration, collaborating with investors, corporates, etc. And as one of the first, I would say the organization also had an idea to bridge into other markets.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I kind of came into the picture and started a division that we called International Relations and Programs, in which we started helping Indian founders find opportunities abroad through collaborations
Mm.
with innovation organizations across the world, from Australia to the US and Canada, and many other countries in Europe, Japan, like really across the globe. And it was a very exciting journey that gave me a lot of exposure that I still try to pay forward to the founders that I tend to work with.
Interesting. So you have been in India, stayed in India, worked with people in India. Are there and you look at India from a different lens, right? And for your clients who probably want to come from the European Union, for that matter, in India, there must be some bursting, of myths that probably you want to do, and maybe it's the best opportunity about doing business in India. What's been your experience so far?
Yeah, I think the thing that I hear most often is they have some sense that there's a market opportunity here in their space. Like for example, in sustainability or mobility, do startups, scale-ups do have a sense across the globe that there is something interesting happening here
Mm.
in India. And they would like to participate, but then they say, I don't even know where to start. I
Mm.
don't know anybody. I maybe have some hesitation because it is quite different. I kind of have a sense that it's different, but I don't even really know where to start. I don't really know anybody, so that's a lack of network that they may experience, right? And they do know from their work at home how important network is,
Yeah.
right? So this is why they typically would seek out help,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's where we bundle a couple of things together for them to create a journey for them that helps them to overcome these mental but also practical
Yeah.
hurdles, right? Because ultimately it boils down to confidence. And then we help them build that confidence, right? So I don't want to necessarily make them dependent on our organization. Ultimately, I want them to thrive
Yeah.
and go by themselves, right? And that's then we figure out what is needed on that journey. So we dive into things like market validation. So oftentimes that means we need to look at the business model with the very sharp eye and see, okay, will that actually work in India, or do we need to make certain changes to the business model or to the product or the way we present it, so the marketing language, etc., right? So we do things like business modeling that you typically do early on in the journey as an entrepreneur. But if you come into a very different market like India, we want to go back to that drawing board and see if it still holds or what kind of changes may be required.
Okay.
We also, like, one of the major things that that our customers express is access to network and clients.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we support that in multiple ways. We have a fantastic network of mentors that myself and the team has built over the years, and who are very like solid and very loyal supporters of the work I've been building with different organizations over the years. So this is a very strong pillar. I'm super thankful that these people have stuck around with me. And then we also do work and introduce the startups and scale-ups to 5-10 clients
Okay.
for them to start engaging with their audience, right? And many of them, they do find their first pilot client, their first customer with a small implementation in those customers, but they obviously also provide feedback into how business may need to go here, how they would like to consume the product, which can be quite different from the way this is being done in Europe or other Western markets.
Okay. Julian, let's double click on this concept of ease of business. And India, maybe 10 years back, it was on a different scale, but there has been a substantial progress, and India is really ranked up now. But does really that ease of business really walk the talk when you see that on the ground? Are there any challenges that you come across? Are there any misconceptions that you think outsiders, or for that matter, the Indian business community or the Indian government at large needs to know, and maybe this is a good medium where you can share your learnings?
Yeah, I think there's both sides, right? There's like a lot of positive surprise on the European side or on the Western side, in the terms of how engaged everybody is, how willing everybody's giving feedback. Like that's really fantastic, and that's one part why I stay engaged with this market, because it's a lot of fun to work here, right? Just from a people's perspective. There are things that we see very differently. Time management, the way we express interest in a product or disinterest, for that matter, right? Like, so there's a huge difference. If I just speak about Germany, for example, clients in Germany tell you outright, I don't want your product. And they don't mind, and we don't mind, because it saves us time. In India, people shy away from being too direct when their response may be hesitation or disinterest, right? So that's definitely something very different, and that can hinder progress, because I may spend a lot of time with a client that's not ultimately interested, right? And the customer relation is being built. You need to build trust first and then only sell. So I would say in Europe or even in North America for that matter, right? We have a more transactional way. We assume that we trust each other when we share an interest in a business transaction, right? In India, you first need to build that. And these are all skills that we need to convey, and like that, where I need to make sure that when they come in, they cannot just barge in with their way of doing business, right? They will need to adopt and pick up on this, right? To be successful. And what we sometimes see is that they become a little impatient, because as you can imagine, right, startups, scale-ups, they all run on budgets. They have investors in their back that constantly check how they spend their time and their money. So time is of the essence. right? And what happens there is they compare opportunities.
Mm.
Oftentimes, if they have exciting products, they also have a lot of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And if then a market doesn't move as fast, maybe as another opportunity, they may fall apart. And ultimately, in India, that is the worst thing that you can do, in my understanding, because if you're not consistent in your engagement,
Yeah.
that'll hurt that trust that still needs to be built, right?
Absolutely.
So these are the little nuances that you start understanding once you go through this process many times,
Mm.
right? And now I've seen maybe 150 companies with me doing these initial steps. And then you get an eye for it when it happens, right? So you can also step in and say, look, you need to, if you're serious, you need to pay more attention here or there.
Mm. Mm.
If you're not serious, maybe, express that as well.
True. You're also the innovation advisor to the European delegation to India. So have you seen, from your last visit way back in 2016 to 2023, 24 now, do you see a substantial or a paradigm shift in the way India is contributing or Indians are contributing to technology and in that space? And what's been your role in this?
Um, yeah, so like to answer your initial question, yes, definitely. I think initially when I came, I think the innovation story of India was a very internal story. And we can see now, and especially after G20 last year,
Yeah.
that there is an opening up happening and also more recognition from the rest of the world
Yeah.
around the topic of innovation from India. Before, I think for many, it was still they've heard about this, but it wasn't very tangible. It wasn't experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Okay.
think that starts changing now. I also see a lot more people from other Western countries like kind of push into the space where I'm operating in. So that's a clear sign that, that there is something to it. I would say when we speak about Europe, right, this is not just, yes, I'm advising the EU delegation, but it is a strong collaboration with all of the member states as well, right? So they all have their own activities to a degree.
Yeah.
And as I shared prior to our conversation today as well, there was a relatively large program that we've run for the European Union called the EU India Inno Center for 3 years to do like very similar work as well.
Yeah.
Mostly supporting European startups coming to India. And the German government, for example, also has a program running, as well as the French, the Swiss, and many others who have more punctual or more sector-specific activities going on. Sweden was focusing on healthcare, for example. So there is a lot of individual things happening from the member states. But from a European Union perspective, we are obviously looking at how can we make things easier as well, right? So there's the free trade agreement negotiations happening as well. So hopefully that will help cross-border collaboration in the innovation space to a degree as well, right? So many things happening there. There's definitely huge interest from the European side, or increased interest from the European side in India and in its innovation.
Wonderful. So when Europeans talk to you or you talk to clients basically outside India, what is their view of India? Because they haven't even come, but they want to come. What is the kind of sense that you gauge when you talk to them? Is it a lot of hope, positive? What are their thoughts as even before they come to the Indian land?
If somebody is already interested, like if they've come to the place where they say this is an interesting market for me, they've obviously done some research or the other, or heard from somewhere that there is growth rates in their industry in India, for example, and there's investment, or the government is pushing for things to change. There's goals out there. So this is what they would know. Some of them may also have team members, colleagues that are Indian that bring in that knowledge, and therefore this level of interest comes about.
Yeah.
So there's multiple things. What they know varies quite a bit.
Okay.
In fact, sometimes we have like Indian participants in like, and I'm speaking about like the many years that I've been doing similar work, right? That have left India for studies and never really worked in India. And they can sometimes be the most appreciative participants
Okay.
because they know they've never made a professional network, for
Yeah.
example, in India, or they don't engage with India on a daily basis in terms
Yeah.
of business.
Yeah.
And so, you know, this is sometimes also for me as the supporter is huge gratification to have people from the country saying, look, you've been helpful. This,
Okay.
you know, this is great.
Can imagine.
Um, with I would say with non-Indians, it's really a spectrum. Like there's people who've traveled maybe to the country, who know a little bit, who have a certain view of the country. But then still, if you get into business, you may get a very different perspective than as if you've come as a tourist and went to Rishikesh and Accra and Goa and those typical places, right? So if you
Yeah.
get into the business landscape, India can be quite different from that experience, right? And others have made their first steps and they may have struggled a little bit in finding the right route, the right network to talk
Mm.
to. And I think this is a huge plus that like our work brings to people
Yeah.
is because we've been active in certain sectors. We've built networks that are quite robust, and
Yeah.
people know that the companies that we come with to India, they're
Yeah.
open to listen to us actually. So that is already multiple steps
Mm.
of hurdles lower than if they would come alone, right? And like I always like to say also, India is not a place that you should do alone.
Mm.
Like that would require a lot of confidence, or you would need to move here, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe then you can overcome some of those things.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you know, there have been large companies like Walmart and others
Mm.
who've significantly failed entering
Yeah.
on their own, right? Or who had to try multiple times to find the right strategy to enter.
Yeah.
So I always say, look, it's you're gonna save time, significant time. So part of our value proposition is definitely to save people time in the process because we provide them access to mentors and clients, etc. Right? So that definitely makes a difference.
Absolutely. In fact, you know, when you talk, probably we talk of India as the Indian central government, but at the same time, you have state governments, right? The various, and India is a big, large country, which a lot of Europeans really need to know that it's the whole culture and the business way of working is completely different. Say in a state like Maharashtra, it would be totally different in Tamil Nadu or Telangana. When
Yeah.
and Indian states also have been doing a lot of their own, you know, advocacy, their own promotional aspects, including places like Davos. What's been your experiences when you talk to Europeans or other clients? Are they also talking to you specifically that they want to go in a state A or a state B or a state C?
Can be. Um, Typically they're not very firm yet in their decision. They may have an inkling.
Hmm.
Like typical things would be if we are in pharma or healthcare, for example, then you have certain
Yeah.
centers that you would look at, right?
Yeah.
Or mobility, you also have certain centers, especially if it becomes more technical,
Yeah.
that you would want to look at, right? If it's, for example, and many of the companies that we work with in the early stages, they don't necessarily take location decisions. And I'm also cautioning many of them to do that too quickly.
Okay.
Many of them also have the idea that they don't need to put up shop in India physically at all.
Hmm.
So this becomes more like an exploration in the journey. How much difference would that make if I had boots on the ground?
Okay.
Or it comes into the picture when we figure, okay, this price point just does not work, for example, right?
Yeah.
How can we make it more palatable? And then for some, local manufacturing comes
Yeah.
like a question, right? And then you need to investigate how much would that reduce your cost.
Yeah.
But you only do that you understand what the market size truly is.
Yeah.
So many of them would rather delay that decision and probably still ship at a loss for some time until they can truly prove how big demand in India is to warrant like local manufacturing. Right? Because it's another level of risk to build up a new manufacturing site. It requires new investment, new funding probably.
Yeah.
Right? So these are all serious questions.
Yeah.
And what I see, there's quite a difference in the agility that startups take decisions as compared if you have like a medium to large size company, right? And that's why our process is also more attuned to the needs of startups, to find them like a certain level of confidence in a decision if to enter, not to enter, and then how to relatively quickly. So like a majority of the work is happening within 3 months. And then obviously there is more granular work with individual clients, partners that may happen.
So typically when you look at typically when you look at the life cycle or the process, the date starts and end to end to setting up a business in India, what's the ballpark kind of months to years that you see for an average client? Is that
so if a client would ask me today, like the setting up, like if you want to open a company, right? That is merely a legal question, operational question. I think that can now be done relatively quickly. But as I was trying to elaborate in my previous answer, that is not really what's holding them back, actually. Because they've potentially not even made the decision if to open a company here. They want to understand how is the market. Am I able to make new customers? And how do I go about it? And if I have some confidence in that process, then I figure out if my product actually requires a local entity.
Yeah.
If my strategy requires local manufacturing, right? But I need that confidence in how my market looks like. Right? And just because I'm reading about a growth rate somewhere of an industry, doesn't necessarily mean I can materialize on it in my sense of business, right? So they need to understand what is required from my side. So one thing that we see, I give you an example. One thing that sometimes becomes inhibitive or delaying of a procedure has very little to do with ease of doing business from Indian regulation, which is a shift from a capex model to an opex model. You'll be surprised how many clients in Europe are still absolutely fine with capex investments. And while startups kind of have it on their roadmap to move to an opex model, they've probably sold their initial investors on a capex financial planning. So that sort of gets in the way of them moving into India, because now we have clients who exclusively want to go on an opex model, right? They want to rent, they want to, they want to purchase on demand, not, they don't want to make a big investment, right? So we have scenarios of water on demand, energy on demand, like hydrogen on demand, like all these kind of things, right? Where I don't want to invest in I don't want to own the infrastructure. You just give me what I want to consume. Right? And if you're not ready with a business model where you have a lot of upfront investment and then the payback, the return on investment only comes in over time, you need to have serious conversations with your investors again, right? And that can absolutely take time and may only materialize in a next round of funding. So that may delay the whole thing. So that's an interesting one. And that's not something they typically see coming. But it increases the pressure to them to move, because they also know if they want to move into markets beyond Europe, not just India, but could be Southeast Asia, could be South America and others. That is the requirement, right? And they have a sense for it, but obviously they delay because money in the bank is better than money in the bank later, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You brought out a very good point where it's a brownie point for India, because you say the problem probably is not the ease of business doing in India from an Indian regulation standpoint. But just to extend this point, the Indian government has giving a lot of emphasis on manufacturing in India, the Make in India concept, and it's been a couple of years now. Uh, what are your views, and what's been that your experience on the ground when visiting India? Is that leading to a lot more capex coming in, or do you see manufacturing happening or scope for that?
I think startups are shy. I think
Okay.
if you speak about medium-sized businesses, that would be a different assessment, but I think for startups, they're still a bit shy.
Okay.
Yeah. They also like to keep things close to them, right? If you start having multiple sites that require
Yeah.
management, that is a serious decision. So it really depends on, so we've been mostly working with like around Series A startups, like in the very recent past.
Yeah.
For my new business, I'm trying to push this a little bit further as well.
Yeah.
And we'll see how this works, right? There is an openness to it, but it very much depends on the volumes.
Okay.
So if there is a volume promise that feels tangible to them, then they consider. Definitely, they will
Okay.
definitely consider. Some things that may be in the way as quality, timelines, these kind of things still pop up.
Yeah.
Here and there. I think there's still work to do on that front, especially when some are used to maybe quality from China.
Yeah. Get the point.
That,
Yeah.
yeah, like, so there are some things there where I think we will need to pay a bit of attention for the next 5 years or so to get it to where the expectation may be
Okay.
in many ways. But and it's very industry specific also. Like what I say may be true for one industry, and
Yeah.
another industry has already had those relationships for so many years in a
Yeah.
very positive fashion
Yeah.
that there is no issue whatsoever, right? So this is not like, it's very difficult to say there's a like
Right.
one assessment about where it
Yeah.
stands
Yeah.
right now.
You
The
can't
push is
generalize it.
obvious.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. So the push is definitely there. You feel it, like even when I'm in Germany, it's there, like you feel the embassy, etc., is pushing this topic quite hard. But also there, I think they're realistic about who may be picking up on this and where there is still space. I think all the large companies that are multinational from Europe, they already have presence in India, and they already do a lot of things, including manufacturing, of course, also other
Okay.
things in the software arena, etc. I think the question is now how this will trickle down into family businesses, for example, where there's huge space, I think, in Germany, for example. And again, Europe is not a monolith either.
Yeah.
Every country has their
So,
own
yeah.
nature of how
Yeah.
businesses have come up over the last 100 years or so.
Yeah.
And they like it really, there's a huge difference if it's like a professional leadership,
Yeah.
hired CEOs, or if you have a family business were more traditionally adverse to giving a lot of stuff
Yeah.
out of their hands.
Yeah.
But yeah, in that space, a lot of things are happening as well. Businesses are being hand over. Children may not want to take over. That there's lots of movement in that
Okay.
space as well that could lead to more interest in these areas that I could see.
Interesting. Before I let you go, I want to definitely ask you a couple of questions, not from the business side, but have you managed to learn a bit of Indian languages, Hindi or Telugu for that matter?
Not really.
Okay.
I always found Telugu very difficult, and in fact, in South India, you get along with English so
Yeah.
well that the need doesn't really arise. Now, I'm spending half of my time in Delhi
Yeah.
since like just this month. That's very recent. I've always said if I ever learn an Indian language, it's probably Hindi.
Yeah.
Because it feels very familiar. As in comparison to Germany, there is some, I don't know, similarities that I pick up on. You may notice that my English is very Indian.
Yeah, very Indian.
That
I think
people
that's a
point
very
out
strong
quite
advantage.
a bit, and that
Yeah,
is definitely an icebreaker for me.
definitely. And what about Indian
So
food? What's your best tried Indian food? What kind of food you love? The South Indian or the North Indian? Now that you know it's so different and so varied.
I can't say that I like one over the other, but there's one that I tend to miss when I'm in Germany, which is rasam, which may surprise people.
Okay, that's nice.
Very
Okay,
simple food, yeah.
okay. And any particular festivals that you've spent time in India that you were lucky to be a part of?
I think I've experienced many.
Uh-huh.
There are some obviously that are more accessible for like a Western mind than others.
Yeah.
Like Holi obviously is a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's coming up. Hopefully, you will enjoy that.
Yes,
Be part of
yes.
it.
No,
True.
absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Juliane Frommter, founder and CEO for My First Indian Client, and also she is the innovation advisor to the European delegation to India. Thank you so much for joining on my podcast, The Sound of Money, Juliane.
Thank you, Santosh. This was a lot of fun.
Most welcome. And well, with that, we come to the end of this episode of The Sound of Money. Catch me on my next episode. But for now, from me, Santosh Sirur, and my guest, Juliane Frommter, thank you for joining on The Sound of Money.